Good morning. A sealed order arranged by a lawyer legislator who serves on the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, working with a friendly judge just one day before that judge is to retire, illegally gets that murderer and in-prison gang leader, Jared Price, released 16 years before it is legally possible. It happened right here. A confessed murderer is denied bond 3 times until he hires a lawyer legislator who serves on the JMSC as his counsel. That lawyer tells his client's mother that they, quote, have to wait for the right lawyer before they ask for a bond. Now, 2 years later, that murderer is walking the streets of Rock Hill awaiting trial as the victim's family has to encounter him every day waiting for justice. A young Orangeburg man from a wealthy family is accused of raping 3 different young women, one of whom eventually commits suicide due to her trauma. Because his family hires the right lawyer and is connected to a powerful lawyer legislator, he serves no time for the alleged rapes. It's not just criminal cases, it's also civil cases. A judge rules against a powerful JMSC member in a civil trial. And even though he has served 15 years without serious complaint, that judge is ruled incompetent, unqualified by the JMSC the next time he applies for reappointment. Those who defend the system will say those are all anecdotal. Of course they are. For the powerful to have power, they cannot abuse it routinely. They must be selective to protect that status. We've been told that the system works because we prosecuted Alex Murdaugh. To that I say, after 70 years of using and abusing the system to his advantage, should South Carolina adopt reforms to increase the independence and accountability of our judiciary by improving transparency and reducing conflicts of interest in the process of reviewing judicial qualifications and electing judges? That was the question number 2 on the Republican presidential primary preference ballot on February the 24th. 91% of the respondents answered that question yes. Let me read that again. Should South Carolina adopt reforms to increase the independence and accountability of our judiciary by improving transparency and reducing conflicts of interest in the process of reviewing judicial qualifications and electing judges? For over 2 years, I have been the only elected State House representative who has traveled the state explaining to South Carolina citizens how we elect judges in South Carolina. I've spoken to groups in my district, which includes all of Newberry County and part of Lexington County. I've spoken to groups in North Augusta, Barnwell, Myrtle Beach, Anderson, Greenville, Camden, Florence, Sumter, Orangeburg, Winsboro, and Blythewood. As I was running for office, I explained to constituents one at a time how the South Carolina judicial election process works. We the people get it. We the people understand it. We the people know that allowing criminal defense attorneys to pick our judges is wrong. It's a simple, common sense question. Answer me this. If you're a Gamecock fan, do you think that Clemson's coaches should be allowed to pick the referees for this fall's Classic? Or maybe you're a Tiger fan. Do you think that South Carolina's coaches should be allowed to pick the referees for this fall's Classic? How ridiculous. How absurd. We the people know that lawyers who are also legislators should not have the power to decide whether a potential judge is qualified or not. We the people know that the Judicial Merit Selection Commission needs a serious course correction. For over 2 years, the leadership of the General Assembly has known that we the people want judicial reform. Last year, the Speaker of the House, Sumter County Representative Merle Smith, formed an ad hoc committee to study that very issue. He appointed York County Representative Tommy Pope to head that ad hoc group. Representative Pope has repeatedly told me that he made it clear to Speaker Smith that he would do it only if there was a desire to come up with a serious reform bill. In February, with bipartisan leadership by Senator Clymer and Senator Harpootlian, Senate Bill 1046 was debated and eventually passed by the South Carolina Senate. After much delay, on February the 28th, House Bill H. 5170 was read for the first time in the South Carolina House of Representatives. In its original form, S. 1046 was a pretty good bill. It addressed almost every issue that we, the people, believe needs to change. What are those issues? Number one, the executive branch, the governor, must have the ability to appoint members to the JMSC. Number two, no trial lawyer who is also a legislator should be able to serve on the commission that qualifies potential judges. Number three, all candidates deemed qualified by the JMSC must have their names submitted to the General Assembly for consideration. And number four, the JMSC must become independent of the legislative branch. How excited I was when I read that original bill. But S. 1046 in its final Senate version is a disaster. As approved by the Senate, the governor would have appointments, but those appointments are dictated by the legislature. As approved by the Senate, it would be possible for 2/3 of the people on the JMSC to be lawyer legislators, rather than the current 60%. As approved by the Senate, instead of the current limit of 3 potential candidates being sent to the General Assembly for a vote, the limit would increase to 6, a slight improvement. S. 1046 does make the JMSC independent of the legislative branch. It is possible to amend S. 1046 to make it acceptable, but getting the House to do so and then getting the Senate to concur is a monumental task. Now I want to address the House Judicial Reform charade. That's correct, I said charade. I looked up that word to make sure it was the correct word. Here's the definition from the Oxford Dictionary. Charade, an absurd pretense intended to create a pleasant or respectable appearance. What makes H. 5170 a charade? The process, the timing. I'll begin my explanation by giving you another definition, crossover. Every year, the General Assembly has a date called the crossover date. Simply put, the crossover date is the date at which no bill that has not passed one chamber can be debated and passed by the other chamber. That date this year is next Wednesday, April the 10th. H. 5170 has not passed out of the Judiciary Subcommittee headed by Representative Jay Jordan. The process is that bills are first approved by subcommittees, then sent to the full committee, and then to the floor for debate. At this point, it is not possible to have H. 5170 debated, amended, and passed by the House before next Wednesday. What I'm about to say is controversial. What I'm about to say is conjecture. What I'm about to say is my opinion of what we have witnessed since last fall. Last fall, Speaker Smith appointed that ad hoc committee to look at judicial reform. It looked good, didn't it? That committee had multiple public input hearings. Several solicitors testified in good faith. Several citizens, victims of the current judicial system, testified. Attorney General Alan Wilson testified. I attended several of those hearings and watched others on TV. It all looked good. Representative Pope insisted that something real was going to come from this. The optics were good. The session this year began in January. On day one, I asked Representative Pope when they would have a bill for us to look at. He assured me they were working on it. 2 weeks later, I asked again. Once again, assurance. Before we took a furlough week in February, I went to Representative Pope again. Quote, "We will have a bill on the Speaker's desk on Tuesday when we return from furlough," he said. Joe, putting this together is as difficult as pushing a rope. Tuesday after furlough, nothing. I asked again on Thursday. Next week was his reply. Finally, on February the 28th, a House Judicial Merit Selection Commission reform bill was presented. As stated earlier, since no subcommittee, no full committee action has been taken. House Bill 5170, even if debated and passed this session, will not be taken up in the Senate this session and therefore cannot become law this year. I cannot prove that the slow process has been intentional, but I can tell you that every time either the House or Senate want to pass legislation, they coalesce the groups and get it from first reading to final approval in record time. Look at how rapidly the Scout Motor legislation to spend $1.3 billion of South Carolina taxpayer money to entice Volkswagen to come to South Carolina went from concept to reality. 12 days. Look at how rapidly H. 4927, the creation of the Executive Office of Health and Policy Bill, took to pass the House. 5 weeks. I can only conclude that H. 5170 was purposely slow-walked to ensure it had no possibility of becoming law. If the Speaker wanted judicial reform, we would have passed a bill in the House this year. Having said all that, the only bill that could become law this year is S. 1046. I've made Representative Jay Jordan, the chair of the Judicial Subcommittee that's responsible for the bill, aware that I have an amendment to S. 1046. I've made Representative Weston Newton, the chair of the Judicial Committee, aware that I have an amendment to S. 1046. That amendment simply says this, quote, since there could potentially be a conflict of interest for a member of the General Assembly who regularly appears before or has business before or is involved in the courts of this state to serve on the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, no member of the General Assembly so situated shall be appointed to the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. This includes, but is not limited to, a member of the General Assembly who is a practicing attorney, paralegal, law clerk, social worker, or person who serves as guardian ad litem. Today, I am asking the South Carolina Press Corps to let the public know what is happening in the name of judicial reform. And I'm asking the citizens of South Carolina to write, text, call, or email your state senator. I'm asking the citizens of South Carolina to write, call, text, or email your state house representative. When you contact them, demand real judicial reform now. The only way that happens is by amending S. 1046. I'm confident that other amendments will be submitted once the debate on 1046 begins. I believe it is still possible to achieve real judicial reform this year, but the only way that happens is by constituent pressure on your elected legislators. Thank you.